Welcome to a how-to video on using Excel to chart and analyze temperature data. We're at the website for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Goddard Institute for Space Studies. If we scroll down on this website, we will see a map of the world, and we can click on any portion of this map, and we'll see a list of temperature stations near the place where we clicked. I'm not familiar with too many of these places, but let's just see if we can get lucky and get one of these websites to one of these places to show some temperature data. So here's a spot from Northern Africa. We don't have very complete data. Looks like from about 1960 to 1990. Then there's a gap in the data for some reason. Possibly the weather station was giving non-reliable data. Possibly the weather station was out of commission during that time. You're going to see that depending on the weather station that you picked. So let's go back and let's maybe pick a place in the United States because the data is probably going to be a little more complete. So let's pick Texas, and here's a number of places that we might recognize. So let's pick one of these spots. Here's Midland, Texas, and so we have data from looks like the late 1940s up until the present. We can see that this data varies on the Celsius scale from just above 16 to up above 19, and we could capture this data if we wanted to. Let's go back now and use an example of a place that I've plotted numerous times here in Pennsylvania. I'm looking for Johnstown. There it is. And I'll use Johnstown as our first example of how to gather this data and use it in Excel. Now, before I go any further, let's go back to Excel for a moment. Here is the assignment worksheet that you'll be using, the climate data charting. Within this worksheet, the first sheet of this file, are very explicit instructions on what to do. Go to the Goddard site. You're going to click on the world map. We'll see that we're going to capture the raw data, how we're going to chart it, and so on. So all of the instructions are here. So I wanted to show you in the video because there are a number of steps, and I just wanted you to at least see it one time. But the steps are here, so you should be able to follow this in a fairly straightforward manner. So here we are with Johnstown, and if you want to get some practice, this is probably a good one to work with. The data is fairly complete from the late 1890s or so up until almost the present is the data that we have listed. On all of these local charts, if we scroll down from the plot, we're going to see that there is a link to download the monthly data as text. So let's click on that. And here we have, wow, a lot of data. Very difficult for us as humans to look at this data and make any sense of it. And here again, this is why it's important sometimes to chart or plot the information so that we can get a visual representation. So I'm going to capture all this data. I'm just going to select it all the way down to the bottom for all those years. And then I'm going to use Control-C to copy it. So now it's on the clipboard. I'm going to return to Excel, and let's select a new worksheet. So I have a blank sheet to work with. And I want to paste this data in, but I want to paste it special. So I'm going to right-click, Paste Special, Unicode Text. So I copied it to the clipboard, came back, selected a cell in a blank worksheet, right-click, Paste Special, Unicode Text. If I don't do that, I may get all of my data appearing in one cell, and I definitely don't want that. So here's OK. So here's all of my data. Now it's all been copied to just column A. It may appear to you that it's in separate columns, but let's prove to you that it's not. So here's cell A1, and I can see up in my formula bar, here are all those titles. And in fact, if I go to B1, I see that that cell is blank, C1 is blank. Again, I'm looking in the formula bar and so on. Same thing is true down the line. A2 has all of the data. B2 is blank. C2 is blank, as you can see. So this is not quite going to be completely useful in this format. So we have to do some adjustments. Let's select column A again. We're going to go to the Data tab. And we're going to try to let Excel convert the text to columns. So let's see if Excel can do this intelligently. And here's a preview of the selected data. Excel noticed that the data is in fixed widths. In other words, looks like it might be in 6 or 7 places, and it noticed that there was a space, and so it separated the data out, and this is how it's going to appear down in the preview. That looks exactly like what we want. So let's finish that. Great. Now we have column A just containing the year. Column B contains the information for January. Column C for February, and so on. Let's look at the rest of the data. So we're analyzing the data just by looking at it individually, making sure it makes sense, trying to understand everything that's here, and then we'll chart it and make sense of it as a whole. So we've got all the various months, January through December, and then we've got some unusual things here, DJF, MAM, JJI, SON. Well, if you think about that for a moment, we recognize that those are the first letters of the seasons. So December, January, February for winter, March, April, May for spring, and so on. And then finally, out in column R, we have something titled MET-AN, which actually stands for Meteorological Annual Average. So in this column, we're going to see the average temperature for the entire year. And it looks like these values, for the most part, are in the teens or the low teens. Again, this is in Celsius, Celsius scale, so we have to remember that that's why this makes sense. This is Johnstown, so 12 degrees Fahrenheit, if that were the average, that would be a very bitter cold year. But this is in Celsius. Now we do have a couple of unusual numbers in here, I'm sure you have spotted. A 999.9. We're going to come back to those and see that those in fact are outlier numbers. All right, but before we go exploring the outlier numbers, let's keep them there for now. And let's chart. We want to just chart the year versus the annual average. So I really don't want any of these other columns. I don't want to remove the data. Maybe I'd like to look at the data later. So I just want columns A and R for the annual average. So you remember how to do this. We select the first column, and then we're going to depress and hold the control key. And then I'm going to slide out the column R and also select that column. So this enables me to select 2 columns that aren't adjacent to each other or that aren't contiguous. Once I have those 2 columns selected, A and R, as you can see, and I can scroll back and forth to check that I have them selected, I'm going to insert. Now I'm going to do a chart of a different kind. I'm going to do a scatter chart because we have 2 columns of numeric data. We have the year and we have the average, the annual average temperature. X and Y values, if you will. Independent, dependent values. They have a relationship with each other. Anytime we have 2 sets of numeric values that have a relationship, we're going to use scatter charts. And I'm going to select this one that smooths the data a little bit. And here's our chart of the meteorological annual temperature data. Now, we look at that data and we say that does not look a lot like the chart that we saw at the website. Let's go back and look at the website. And let's go back to the chart. This is what we're initially trying to duplicate, is this chart of Johnstown. And our data looks very flat. If we go back to Excel, and this is where those outliers are disturbing our chart, because notice our scale here goes from 0 to nearly 1,000. Remember the 999.9. So we have a couple of outliers in here, and outliers are sometimes inserted purposefully, maybe because the researcher decided that that year's data was not complete, or for whatever reason could not be trusted. And so they put in a specific number that we would all spot, knowing that it's an obvious outlier, 999.9. So there are ways to deal with outliers. For us, the simplest thing to do is going to be to delete the entire row when we see a 999 in column R. Now we're not interested in these other columns. I don't care if there's 999s in these other columns. I'm only concerned when there's a 999 outlier in column R. And if I scan down through here, I see that there's 1, and there's 2, and there's 3. And actually, if I look at our chart, I do see 3 outliers, 1, 2, 3. So let's begin to remove those and notice what happens to our chart.